Thank you, Alex. Good morning, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving. I hope you had a wonderful time. And I wonder who of you invited your families to join us to help the poor this year. I just want to remind you that we've got these amazing cards there in the back in the fireside room to share with family or people at work. And also, Olivia is just so creative. She got all these little ornaments that you can take home. If there's somebody who said, that they're outside of the church and they say they're going to give a big gift or something, just give them one of these. There's a door. These are little feet for raising money for the babies, a little door for Green Door, and it's green too. And just a prayer reminder too that this is what we're going for. And then on this one, the Open Hands, Open Heart Project to remember the giving food to those who are most needy. Today I wanted to tell you a little bit about the situation that the people find themselves in that we are ministering to. So the money that goes to the poor in the world from the World Bank and international, only about 15 to 20% of that money goes to those in extreme poverty. That's very little if you think about that. And most of those people make less than $1 a day to survive for them and their families. So more often than not, I'm just going to read a little bit to you. The founder of CRI that we're working with wrote this in an article that I think I'm going to make available to you. It's called The Role of the Righteous Wealthy, which we all are even when we don't feel it. I said more often than not, the very poor are women. Women perform 2/3 of the world's work, but only earn 1/10 of the world's income and own less than 1/100th of the world's property. On $1 a day, the margin separating them from catastrophe is very thin. It is as if they were standing in water up to their chin, and one wave, a family illness, a poor crop, or even the loss of a few chickens can overcome them. And so I wanted to do a little exercise of what would it be like to live on $1 a day. It would mean that we would have 99% less money to spend. On that salary, a gallon of milk would cost the equivalent of $350. A steak for a family of 4 from a grocery store would cost the equivalent of $2,000. And this was before inflation, by the way. Cable TV would run about $5,000 a month. And at these prices, we would do without all of these things. Our spending would drop down to almost nothing because our income would be hovering just above zero. And so here is a little exercise just to imagine. A clever thought experiment written by an economist helps us put us in their shoes. Let's assume that you woke up tomorrow and you had to live the rest of your life on an income of $30 a month. What would your house and your home look like? You would begin by stripping your house of all furniture. Everything goes. The beds, the chairs, the tables, TV, lamps, cupboards, everything goes. You leave only a few old blankets and a wooden chair. You have no bed. You sleep on a reed mat or a piece of plastic on the ground. During a hard rain, you may have to stand up all night long to avoid getting wet because all of the leaks in the roof. All the clothes you go to, except for your oldest suit or dress, plus an extra shirt or blouse. Only one pair of shoes can stay, and that's for the head of the house. No shoes for the wife or the kids. Next, you dismantle the bathroom, shut off the running water, strip out the electrical wires, and while you're at it, the house must go entirely. You move into the tool shed in the backyard. No more papers, magazines, or books. They are not that missed, since only one member of the family can read at all. We will allow a small radio to remain, maybe. Government services go next. No more postmen or firemen. The nearest medical center is 10 miles away, and has only a midwife. Your cars? Oh, they go too. The only thing that's left behind is one bicycle for the whole family, and even that is a luxury. Now the food. The makeshift cupboard in your tool shed holds a small bag of grain of some kind, perhaps rice, maybe some sugar, if it's good, a good year, and salt, a couple of moldy potatoes, and a couple of overripe mangoes. A small box of matches is there, but everything else is gone. Meat, vegetables, canned goods, crackers, candy, milk, everything gone. And finally, money. Your $1 in income is spent as fast as it comes in. You have cash savings of $5 hidden under your mat. I don't like to live like that, do you? And that's why we do what we do in raising the funds. And I hope that that was a meaningful exercise for you, because that is the reality of all the people that we're giving to this Christmas. The end.
So you just spent your whole year's income on your turkey from this weekend. Yeah, well, if you get a small turkey. It's like, that can be depressing a little bit, but the opportunity to make a difference is huge. In setting that $100,000 goal, we shared, Need and I decided we're going to try and raise $20,000 of that, just talking to friends and family members. I had no idea how hard it is to do that. I actually have a list of 40 people, friends, people who used to be part of the church who moved away, etc., that I'm connecting with, and man, I swallow so hard before I make a call or send an email to set up a call, and working through that. So far, every single person I've talked with has been, wait a minute, I'd love to be part of that. You would? Oh, cool. I think I'll call somebody else. I have no idea how much. We'll see the follow-through, but I've been surprised, and I shouldn't be because these are people I know, but still, there's something in me or in our culture that asking for money is hard. So my first line is usually, hey, I had a question for you. Before I even ask it, let me just tell you, you don't have to do this. It's like before I even ask, I'm telling you don't have to. There's no pressure here or whatever, and I just say what we're doing. And they've been very willing to do it. Somebody's already come in. We didn't count the offering this week because of the holiday, and our bookkeeper's out of town. So starting next week, I got drafted, so as some of you heard last time, I'll be doing a push-up for every $1,000 raised on stage during the announcement. So at 5 or 10,000, that'll be fine. We start to get to closer to that 100. Might be a very long morning for me. Anyways, let's shift gears. I want to talk about Thanksgiving. Actually, I'm changing the topic, so Josh and Liv, sorry if you were planning on the original topic. The first Thanksgiving was actually roughly 401 years ago. Don't know if you realize that. In the spring of 1620, the Mayflower took off from England with 102 people on it, sailed across the ocean, and arrived on U.S. soil, it's now American soil, obviously, in November, just in time for a New England winter. Most of the people spent the next 6 months or so just on the ship, trying to survive, trying to, manage the weather, et cetera. And by springtime, when they got off the ship and went to shore, half the people had died. So there was roughly about 50 people left. And when they got to shore, they were shocked to meet an Indian from a local tribe who spoke English. And that Indian introduced them to another Indian. Historically, we call him Squanto. It's not his literal, it's a more Americanization of his Indian name. Squanto spoke English. He had actually been taken as a slave many years before, him and some other Indians, taken to Spain to be sold. And when some local Christian monks heard about it, they stepped in and bought them in order to set them free. So pretty cool. In the process, obviously he built a relationship with them. They gave him some education. He learned English and eventually made his way to England and back to America, where he was staying with the tribe, living with the tribe in the area where the Mayflower landed. And so when they landed, he was there, and he kind of took them under wing, right? And because they had no idea in this new land what crops would work, what didn't, most of the ones they brought, the seeds didn't take in the soil they had. So he actually taught them things like how to hunt in that area, how to fish, what berries you could eat or not. How to plant crops, like cultivate corn, all kinds of things like that, how to get sap from maple trees. So by November, then, of 1621 of that year, roughly 6 or 7 months later, they brought in their first corn crop. They'd planted it, they'd seen it grown, they brought in their first crop and realized, we're going to make it. We're going to make it. We're going to survive. And the governor, a man named Governor Bradford, declared a Thanksgiving holiday. He didn't call it that. He said, we need to celebrate. We need to give thanks to God and have a feast. And so that's what they did. It said a celebration feast. They invited the local Indian tribe, the Wampanoag. I'm sure I'm killing that pronunciation, but something like that. And Squanto, the Indians joined them. The Indians brought deer that they had hunted, brought in, and the feast lasted 3 days. It was a big celebration, which, if your life has been saved, you're kind of grateful, hopefully. And that's considered the first Thanksgiving 401 years ago, end of November. And that became a tradition, eventually became a formal holiday, hundreds of years later. Now, why am I telling you that? Because you need to know your history. But also because that practice, that choice to have that kind of Thanksgiving or celebration feast was rooted in the Old Testament. It was an Old Testament practice of giving thank offerings, right? And so I want to talk about that a little bit. If you're familiar with the Old Testament, a lot of the worship was actually rooted in what was called a sacrificial system, where you were bringing offerings for different reasons and things like that. That's how you worshiped as a Jew at that time. And some of those things in the system were obligations, and some were options, right? So you had a combination. Obligation was something like the tithe. Like every adult Jew is required to bring 10% of their income. If they were farmers, it would be crops. If they were merchants, it'd be revenue, whatever it was. And that was given to the Lord. It was the Lord's portion. It was considered holy, and you had nothing to say about it. God decided how much. He decided that 10% was his portion. Where it goes for, what it's used for, it's like you're giving this and hands off, this is God's, right? No choice in the matter. That was God's money, God's offering, God's portion. So it was an act of worship, an act of obedience as well. But then there were other things that were optional, and those are usually referred to as offerings. And some of those were for different reasons. They had things like guilt offerings. If you sinned, there were some prescribed things. This is what you have to do. They were prophetic acts pointing towards Jesus who is to come, but by doing that, you could have your sin forgiven, right? Just ignore the baby. Mike, you can pay attention to, but the baby gets grace. God paying me back. Mike did that, actually. But some of those offerings were called technically free will offerings. In other words, it was completely up to you if you did it at all. You could go your whole life and you never had to give a free will offering. It was totally up to you. Most didn't do that because it was a good thing to do, but it was totally up to you if you gave anything, how much you gave, if you designated it for someone or something. It was completely up to you. It was a free will offering, right? So you've got these obligations and you've got options. Let's see, where's my glasses? I want to read you a passage out of Leviticus, which I know you all read regularly, that describes this and how that free will offering was to be given. So this is out of chapter 22. It says, the Lord said to Moses, speak to Aaron and his sons and to all the Israelites and say to them, if any of you, either an Israelite or an alien living in Israel, presents a gift for a burnt offering to the Lord, either to fulfill a vow or as a free will offering, you must present a male without defect from the cattle, sheep, or goats in order that it may be accepted on your behalf. Don't bring anything with a defect, because it won't be accepted on your behalf. When anyone brings from the herd or flock a fellowship offering to the Lord to fulfill a special vow or as a free will offering, it must be without defect or blemish to be acceptable. Do not offer to the Lord the blind, the injured, or the maimed, or anything with warts or festering or running sores. Do not place any of these on the altar as an offering. You get the idea? And basically what he's saying there is, if you're going to bring an offering and you're not obligated to bring it, bring a good one. In other words, if you want to give flowers, get a nice rose bouquet. Don't offer a bunch of dead dandelions. It's kind of insulting, right? And that's the contrast when he says, don't bring it. If you've got an animal with 2 broken legs, he's got running sores and warts all over, that's really not a good way of worshiping God. It's like you want to invite the president over, you're probably not going to serve leftovers. I think leftovers are pretty good, but, you probably won't do that. The thanks offering, which the pilgrims modeled their feast on, was one of those free will offerings. And the end of this passage, I skipped a few verses just for time's sake, but in verse 29 says, when you sacrifice an offer of thanksgiving to the Lord, sacrifice it in such a way that it will be accepted on your behalf. In other words, follows rules. Bring a good one. It must be eaten that same day. Leave none of it till morning. I am the Lord. Now, in a Thanksgiving offering was done a little differently. Normally, you bring an offering, and it's given there, and it's given to the priests, and it becomes one of their meals. A Thanksgiving offering was different. You would bring it, you're presenting it to the Lord, and then you would eat it. You would eat it yourself, except you wouldn't eat it by yourself. It wasn't like a private meal. This was a meal where you would invite your friends, your family, your acquaintances to join you. You're basically throwing a party as a way of saying thanks to God. And the more thankful you are, the bigger the party it is, right? And the idea is all these people who are coming are going to join you in giving thanks, right? So you're thankful and you're sharing it so they'll all be thankful. Right? In other words, you're doing something so they're going, oh, thank you. You're eating your turkey, you're at somebody else's house. You have that happen? You're eating the turkey, you're so glad you didn't have to make it. And you're eating the stuffing and the dessert and appetizer, and you're going, oh, you're thankful, hopefully, for what they provided for you. The idea is that other people are going to end up giving thanks for your thanks. Does that make sense? So you're multiplying thanksgiving by having this feast and inviting other people to do it. You are sharing your joy so that joy would increase. You're giving thanks in such a way that thanksgiving will increase, right? You're multiplying what you're doing. That was the idea behind that feast. There's a similar passage in the New Testament in 2 Corinthians that I want to look at that has the same idea. Right? And if you know, are you familiar with this passage? There was a certain time where there was a famine in Jerusalem, and Paul contacted all the Gentile churches, or a lot of them that he had been, he had planted and developed and led, and basically invited them and said, look, your brothers and sisters are hurting. They don't have enough food, and asked them to take an offering to help their brothers and sisters back there. And the churches all did, and it was an offering. It wasn't their tithe. Their tithe was still what they gave to their local body. That's how you provide for your local body. That's what it was for. But the offerings were above and beyond that, and he gave all kinds of instructions for how to do that. Now plan ahead, save money, set it aside, so when I get there, you've got it ready to go, and we can just take it and deliver it, etc. But then the instructions he gives, or the comments he gives, Chapter 9, I'm going to start in verse 12. I'm taking it right out of the middle. It says, this service that you perform is not only supplying the needs of God's people, but is also overflowing in many expressions of thanks to God. Because of the service by which you have proved yourselves, men will praise God for the obedience that accompanies your confession of the gospel of Christ, and for your generosity in sharing with them and with everyone else. And in their prayers for you, their hearts will go out to you, because of the surpassing grace God has given you. Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. Now, you notice what he's saying there. He's saying, you're giving this gift, and it's going to result in more people giving thanks. It's going to result in an overflow of joy in other people because you're giving this offering. You're saying, basically, God has blessed us. He's provided for us. So we're going to share with our brothers and sisters in need with the result that thanksgiving and praise increases. And at the end of the day, it's God who's elevated. Because those people in Jerusalem are saying, basically, God, thank you for our brothers and sisters, but they're probably saying, God, thank you. Thank you that you moved them. Thank you that you touched them. Thank you that you provided for them. Thank you that they are generous enough to share with us, right? God is at the center of it. And it's interesting, he says, their hearts will go out to you. You ever had someone provide for you anonymously? I get to do that occasionally. Someone will give me some money and say, give it to so-and-so, but don't tell them who it's from. Tell them it's from Jesus. And the person getting it is always a little bit frustrated, like, I just want to say thank you. Can't you tell me? I'm like, give thanks to Jesus. That's, I can't do anything more. But their heart goes out to whoever helped them. That's just normal, right? Your heart goes out when someone comes alongside you in need, whether it's financially or some other way. Now, the other thing I want to point out when it says their heart goes out because of the surpassing grace God has given you. Now think about that. Because earlier, and I didn't read this, in verse 8, Paul is telling them, he says, God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that in all things at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. Grace, in this context, is actually money. God giving them grace was giving them provision, was giving them resources so they could abound in every good work, so they could be a blessing to other people. And then Paul says, and they are going to celebrate God's grace to you, his provision. There's a recognition underneath that when you call it grace, it's part of God's generosity, right? You ever gotten a raise or bonus at work that you weren't expecting? No. Well, pray for it, because that's actually part of God's generosity. Just saying, you know what, I'm going to move your boss, I'm going to move your employer, and bless you. You didn't earn it, you didn't deserve it, or maybe you did, but you weren't going to get it, but God moved there. One way to think about this is what I call nonverbal prayer, right? Giving a thanks offering, maybe they verbalize something to God, but that's not part of the requirement. That's not part of the celebration. I assume they did. We do Thanksgiving. We go around and say, what are you thankful for? And, this year we had to make a new rule because every single person was saying family. We're like, okay, come on, you got to go a step beyond that. That's great, but go further. But it's a form of nonverbal communication, all right? You guys are aware, like, when you talk to another person, human communication is something like 80 or 90% nonverbal, right? You're aware of that? How someone says something, the expression on their face, their posture, if they're using your hands, the tone of voice, all of it comes into how we understand what's being said. It's a key part of the communication, not just the words that are used. Now, track with me a minute. You realize that we're made in the image of God, right? Right? Do I need to go back to Genesis, or are we good? We were made in the image of God, which means if we are that way, if a key part of our communicating with each other is nonverbal, it means that's how God is as well, right? Human beings didn't just wake up and decide, I think I'll put a lot of emphasis on tone of voice. I'll put a lot of emphasis on their facial expression. That kind of communication, which is worldwide, it's always been, you can't go to a culture where that doesn't matter, is because that's a reflection of God's nature, which means that our communication with God should be both verbal and nonverbal as well. And Scripture is full of examples of nonverbal communication. If you go through and study, for example, the different Hebrew words that are translated praise, half of them are nonverbal, right? So yada is a Hebrew word, it means lifting hands. Kara is a word that means dance. Clap is taka. Barak means kneeling. And there's words for prostrating yourself, etc. Those are all nonverbal forms of communication. They're nonverbal ways of praying. When Jesus says that greatest commandment is to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, part of that is nonverbal. Using your body, your strength, your physical abilities to worship. Right? That's part of it. Fasting is a form of nonverbal communication where we're praying without words. A thanks offering, like we just talked about, is similar. It's a form of nonverbal communication. And the idea there is that, sometimes words aren't enough. You ever had that happen in life? Sometimes words just aren't enough. You want to say thank you to a person who's really blessed you, and words just aren't enough. Like, what can I say? What can I do? And maybe you sit down and just write a card because somehow it feels like going that extra step communicates more. Right? Nonverbal communication. It's part of how this whole thing operates. Thanksgiving, giving thanks is a key part of prayer. Right? Philippians 4:6 is a verse that says, bring your requests to God with thanksgiving, and God's peace will overflow in your life. And the idea there is that if you're connecting with God, you're bringing your request, remind yourself. Be thankful, and that means you have to look at what he's done for you. Wait a minute, he's provided for me before. He's taken care of me before. He's encouraged me before. He's comforted me before. He's done all this before. Let me remind myself of that, and as I'm making requests for the next thing, whatever that is, I can do it with the foundation of, He's done this for me before. This is not like an out-of-bounds request. God has been good to me. He's been faithful to me. He's taken care of me. He's provided for me. So, Lord, thank you. And then often our requests become, now, Lord, do it again. And I don't know about you, but I often find do it again means, now, Lord, do it again, but bigger. It's like, not like, last year I needed $1,000 and God provided, and this year I get to say, oh, God, I need 100. It seems like he keeps ratcheting it up. You know what I mean? It's like if it was 1,000 last year, it's 5,000 this year. And I'm like, I don't want to get to next year because but it's like God continually growing us in trust, continually growing us in an understanding of his provision and his resources and his generosity. There's a process that's involved. So let me just ask you, we're going to go into worship in a little while. We're going to start with Thanksgiving, with communion. But I want to ask you some questions and just ask you if you are thankful today. And I'm going to give you a series of questions. You don't have to raise your hand or answer out loud, but just reflect on it. And let me ask you these questions. Are you thankful, if you're a Christian, that your sins are forgiven? Are you thankful that you can stand before God completely clean without a blemish or shadow of any kind, with no guilt or shame? Are you thankful that you can call God, the creator of everything, Father? Are you thankful that he's with you and he's for you? Are you thankful that you have a guaranteed place in heaven, that your eternity is secure? Are you thankful that you were adopted into his family? You're thankful that he gave you his Holy Spirit to actually live inside of you and work in you and on you from the inside out. Are you thankful that you have a purpose to live for? Are you thankful that Jesus won, that he conquered death, that he defeated the devil, that he overcame all the challenges and temptations of the world? that he actually won every battle. You're thankful that you're going to get a new body someday. Every year I go on, I'm more thankful for that. Let me ask you a different kind of question. Have you ever had God answer a prayer? Have you ever had God answer a prayer before you prayed it? It was in your heart, you longed for it, you wanted it, but you never actually hadn't gotten around to verbalizing it, and yet God came through and you knew he was answering the cry of your heart. Have you ever had God provide for you in a time of need? You didn't know what you were going to do, and God came through. You ever have God come through and bring you some encouragement when you were down or struggling, and either the Lord himself in some way or he brought someone to you that just brought the right word at the right time, the right thing at the right time? I remember in our first church one time being depressed and struggling and just discouraged, and the neighborhood alcoholic came over and was chatting. He said, "Oh, hold on," and he left. He could see I was down. He went home, got a couple beers, brought him back because he wanted to encourage me. It worked. You ever had God bring you comfort when it was needed? Or wisdom when you didn't know what to do and you were facing a situation, you were stuck, and suddenly somehow the answer came? Maybe God dropped it into your mind, an idea. Maybe someone else came along. Maybe you read something. Have you ever had God draw near to you after you really screwed up? And all you're feeling is guilt and shame, and you know the truth, you know you're forgiven, but somehow you can't get a hold of it, and God breaks through and lets you know in a very personal way, yes, you are forgiven. You're still in the family. You're still my son, my daughter. You're not kicked out. You ever have God heal you? Physically? Emotionally, many of us at times have had just broken hearts and needed God to come through and help it. Or have you ever had God use you to bless someone else? To be that person who brought the comfort, the encouragement, the wisdom, the prayer, the word, whatever was needed. I suspect everybody in here can say yes to at least 90% of those. Which means we have a lot to be thankful for. And I want to encourage you, even this morning, we have the worship team come on up and get ready, and if you want to come up to take us into communion, to take a minute and think about that. Well, God's done a lot for me. And some of those for you are probably going to stand out. They're like biggies, like, man, I'll never forget this. And others that are true but not as powerful or dramatic or whatever. But whatever it is, I want to encourage you to connect with that, and let's use this time as a time of giving thanks. I hope as you think about all the things that God has done for you or through you. Is this a sign? I was like saying, Dave, stop there. I hope it results in a thankful heart. And as you think about even the Christmas offering we're doing and what you want to give or how much, let part of it, as you try and pray or figure that out or decide, how much that is or how much you want to raise, let part of your attitude be, man, God, this is just one of my ways of saying thank you. I want this to be an expression of thanks to you for all you've done for me. Now, I say that, and I know that some of you are going to say, well, if I'm going to be really thankful, I should give absolutely everything I have, empty my retirement account, sell my house. And I would suggest, if the Lord appears to you and says that, you should obey. Otherwise, don't be crazy, but be thankful. And say, Lord, how can I tell you, show you, communicate how thankful I am for all the things you've done for me? That's what results in cheerful givers, as opposed to manipulated givers or, burdened givers or forced givers or something like that. Cheerful givers, it comes from a thankful heart. So on that note, we go into communion and then we can go into worship.